All right, good evening. This is not a traditional board meeting, but we will go ahead and begin at 6:04 p.m. and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, so before we begin, I would like to acknowledge all those that are here this evening in the audience. This will be recorded and posted on VHS, TV, YouTube later on. So thank you for all those who will be watching, and the members of the Board of Education, Town Council, Board of Finance, and any other town leaders who are here with us today in school administration, school security. So thank you to all for being here, and I would also like to thank the individuals sitting at this table, and I will go ahead and introduce everyone. So to the left of me, we have our mayor, Mark Kaczynski. Then we have our chief of police, McNally. Sorry. We have the superintendent of schools, Brian Benigni, and then we have the director of security, safety, and residency for Berlin Public Schools, John Schmaltz. So I just want to start out with the purpose of this forum this evening. So this is an opportunity for us to share with you the measures that we have established over the past number of years. The Berlin Board of Education has worked with town leaders, those sitting at the table and in the audience, to take a proactive approach with school security. Working together has allowed experts to make decisions and discuss funding as it relates to their specific roles, so we can all make the best informed decisions to make sure our schools are safe and secure. The board could not have done this alone and make choices that are best for every student that attends Berlin Public Schools without all working together collectively. So establishing security measures we're also going to be talking about this evening. This started years ago when the board made the decision to bring forward armed security. We knew we needed security in our schools, and over probably the course of a full year, we researched and engaged in significant discourse around unarmed security and armed security. We were one of a few school districts in the state to have armed security at that time. And no one has had any issues with it since then. So to get to this point where we feel we do have strong security measures due to our strong communication with the stakeholders involved, it's because of the proactive approach that we have taken. The recent uptick in the news with threats throughout the state and the nation has caused a lot of concern for everyone, for parents, students, those working in schools, and community members. And so we think holding this forum this evening is imperative just to clearly communicate what we have done and then provide the opportunity to answer any questions. So in regards to school security measures, we are not able to share all the details around specific security plans and safety plans, as that could potentially put the schools in unsafe positions, but we will do our best to answer questions or get back to you on questions. We do ask for you to hold questions until the end. So I have a list of questions that I'm going to go through, and I will let those at the table answer them best that they can. And then once we get through our Q&A and discussion, then you can approach the members at this table, and we will do our best to answer questions. So we are going to start out with communication partners. So parents, students, staff, law enforcement, and security. Those are our partners in communication. What communication will take place if parents and staff need to be notified of a potential threat? So I'll turn that over to the superintendent, and then if anyone else would like to add to that, they can.
Thank you. The goal for this evening is for you, all that came out, to walk away with more knowledge than when you walked in, to have an understanding of what's currently in place over the years, and to also look at, once you have a chance to ask Q&A, to tell us what you're thinking of the future. We also have things that we're thinking about in the future. We're continually thinking about how to improve the security measures, especially in the time that we're living right now. So with that being said, about the communications. I sent an email out last week after the first swatting that came out at McGee Middle School. I know that there was information posted on social media. That information went to everyone, but my letter only went to McGee. It only went to McGee because McGee was the only school that was mentioned by the chief on Sunday night. And people said, why didn't you get out earlier? How can you get out earlier? Information is sent to you as soon as we can get it out, and I want someone can write up what's being said, put the security measures in place, and then share it with you. So here's the thought of how the communication goes. So the first part of what the message is, what information do we have? So in that letter, I gave you as much information as I could that the chief gave me. There are times where some information I may not be able to give you because it's not supposed to be given out to the public, but I gave you as much as I had regarding the McGee incident, potential McGee incident, I should say. Then I gave you all the security measures that were going to take place in addition to what we normally do. And by the end of the night tonight, you'll know what we normally do for security measures. And the last part is, at that point, you know as much as we know. And if you feel that security, you don't feel comfortable with what we have in place, or you feel the threat may still be credible, despite our best professionals saying it may not be credible, the parents have a right whether to send their child to school or not, and we understand that. Now, the in-between part we're going to talk about tonight is what else could we do to ensure that you feel comfortable sending your children to school as a school district. And the hope is that when we share with you what we currently have in place and what potentially could in place, we'll be in a better place. But that being said, that's how the message would travel. And it wouldn't travel to the whole district unless it impacted the whole district. But when things get put on social media, as it was put that evening, here's a message from the superintendent, just in case you didn't get it. There was a lot of concern, and board members' phones started to buzz because you could have a student at the high school, and now you saw this message and you somehow missed it, or a student at Willard and you missed it. But it was directed just to the school. So my clarification email at the end of the week was, this is how communication travels. If it's going to impact your school and we have information of a threat, it'll be sent directly to you at that school. So I hope that clarifies a little bit how communication travels. And then the other part I want to talk about is I received 8 emails. 4 of them were great job on communicating. 4 of them were not contentious at all. They wanted to know more information. Wish you could have got the Snapchats. I asked the chief for them. He didn't have the Snapchats. Couldn't get those to you. And the other email was, can you tell me how or who decides to close school? And I want to respond to all of you. Who decides? I decide whether school is closed as part of my job as your superintendent. Just as I do with snow days or during COVID, we look to professionals such as the police chief, CTEC, which he's going to talk about, security director. They advise me of how credible the threat is and what kind of security measures can be put in place. Based on that information, the decision will be made in conjunction with the safety professionals, should school open or close. If it should close, we would close it at that point, as other districts did in the state. But based on the information the other day about McGee, the chief saying it's not credible, the security director saying it's not credible, we didn't think it should close. So ultimately, the decision to close school would come from the superintendent, just like with inclement weather or a health department concern.
So we can continue.
I think that gets to my couple communication points. I don't know if others want to add about communication.
If any of you
I'll just add that everything the superintendent said is everything that he got. Sometimes in law enforcement, we can't give anybody all the information, especially if we're dealing with any kind of case that might involve juveniles. So as I got the information on Sunday evening from my officers who had the investigation, once we started getting some of that information, I said, well, we better get in touch with the school system right away, which we have an open line of communication, myself and the superintendent, and John Schmaltz at the end there, all the time. We meet every month, so we always have that relationship. You know, Sunday night, we're still in the process of investigating it, and we're trying to make a decision, an informed decision, if it's a specific threat or a non-specific threat. In this instance, it was very generic, non-specific, and that's part of the process that when I talked to the superintendent, I said, this is what we're working on. This is the information I have, and it was very limited because it was involving Snapchats, which, they disappear pretty quickly, and you'd have to seize a phone, and there's a whole bunch of stuff with having to get search warrants and taking phones from juveniles. We just can't do that. So, we work off the information that we have generally, and knowing what the climate was and was for the past 2 weeks prior to that Sunday night in the state of Connecticut, and continuing even to just a few minutes ago before I came here, I've got some intelligence information on an event that could happen and across the country. It's not just a local phenomena, it's not just a state phenomena, it's a national phenomena. So that's the information that we can give,
Thank you.
Almost set. Thank you.
Mr. Schmaltz, would you like to add?
No, the McGee incident, we got the CTIC bulletin before that incident occurred, and one of the specific screenshots that were provided that the students were passing around, we already had that information, so we knew we were dispelling it in the process, and McGee's administration was aware of it. Consultation, as Brian said, with the police department and myself, we knew that one was not an accurate depiction of what was going to occur, and we tried putting out the information ahead of time. So we had that information ahead of time, and once it occurred, we could pretty much confirm. It's not going to happen every time, but we tried being ahead of the curve, paying attention to patterns, trends, going across the country and locally. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is just reading about these after-action reports and so forth. So there are systems in place. Majority of the times they work, sometimes they don't. Sometimes corrective action needs to occur afterwards, because once you have a plan, somebody wants to beat you doing it, and these groups that are providing this information, if we told you what we're going to do, they're going to come up with a plan to beat it. That's why the information is somewhat, restricted as far as what we're put out there.
If I could speak to one moment about Mr. Schmaltz, a little bit about his background. So John has been with us over 5 years, a little over 5 years. John was a former police officer in the north end of Hartford, lieutenant for 20 years. He was director of security at the University of Hartford for 10 years. So having him as a security director for our school district is a huge plus to the district, to have him someone with his credibility and someone who can focus solely on, his title is Security, Residency, and Safety Director, right? So with that title, he's focused solely on the security and supervision of all of our security officers in the district. So that is a huge plus, where in many districts, it's left to other individuals in the district. So I'm just trying to point out things that we've had in place and are still in place.
All right, so now we are going to talk about current procedures. We can start with school safety all hazards plan, which is required by the state of Connecticut. So I don't know who would like to kick that off. John, would you like to start, and then anyone else can add?
Yeah, after the Sandy Hook incident, 15 years ago, the state came up with a lot of mandates for the school, and so for the K through 12 schools was to have an all safety hazards plan. And they give you a boilerplate, and each school district's got to customize it to meet and service their needs. And it covers a lot of topics, the incident command structure, but the key things to me are the annexes, which talk about threat protocols, intruder, violent incidents, missing person, suicide, weapons, drive-by shootings. So all these plans are in place, and again, you got to adjust them to meet the need, what resources you have at your school, what the resources the PD has. And again, this is an ongoing planning process. We do brief tabletops at some of the administrative council meetings with a shooting incident or a tragic injury inside a school. And again, it's monitoring the behavior, managing the behavior of the staff members, the students, and communicating to the parents and guardians of the students what's going on. And again, every school district has them. Some of them are very well written. Some of them are just cut and pasted. In some cases that I read were garbage, but I think we're a cut above based on my experiences at the University of Hartford, the federal mandates we had to follow there, and in the state mandates here, making a cohesive plan based on my experience monitoring human behavior at shootings, tragic incidents, motor vehicle accidents, and so forth. So I think we're one step above. And again, with the SRO we have, I worked with his brother in Hartford, so I know Mark very well, his brother very well. They're a cut above, and you should be fortunate to have somebody of his quality. And people don't realize law enforcement is basically managing human behavior. You go to a motor vehicle accident, you got to triage the injuries, what's going on, keep people from fighting. You go to a domestic situation or burglary, you're managing human behavior, and you're developing your responses to that. So when I was at the University of Hartford, we had again, the feds mandated behavioral threat assessment. They put terminology on it. Every call for service is behavioral threat management for a law enforcement officer. So coming into an academic environment, we look at things differently than the school administration does. It's just a different way we look at stuff, the way you evaluate people. We identify students like, the patterns, the way they dress, the way they act, physical injury on their bodies, bruises or needle marks, stuff along those lines, that the average person doesn't see. So you have an additional set of eyes. They have 360 set of eyes versus a teacher in a classroom with 15, 20 students, administrators managing hundreds of students. So I think having retired law enforcement is a huge bump for the schools, especially here in Berlin. There's 4 Hartford retired, a lieutenant from UConn, a sergeant from Berlin. I think you got a very good crew of eyes and ears in the schools providing information to administrators to make decisions and forward it to Brian, and especially the working relationship with the Berlin Police Department.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add on the all-hazard plan?
The only thing I would add to that, because John did a good job covering
Yes.
it, just so you know, it's not a secret that every time there's an event at any other district across the United States, we're going to review our plans and see what worked and what didn't work in those locations, compare them to our plans, and make sure that, we're always on the cutting edge when it comes to the security part, and our plans are living documents. Nothing is ever set in stone because things change all the time. So we have to review after every time something else happens someplace else, and we learn from every one of those incidents. I do agree, though, that the plans here are a cut above of normal. Where I came from, in the city of Danbury, we had done a Safe Schools initiative, and they hired a private company to do their planning, and what they got was a cookie cutter, pre-book plan. And all you had to do was put the name of the school system in the blank spot. And I know Danbury's going to get mad because I'm saying this, but since then they've changed. But that's something that happens with some of the bigger districts. They hire a company and they don't know the inner workings of the school system intimately like they do here in Berlin. So that, I think, it should be some comfort because we're very familiar and we're very active in what's happening in this district, in the school system.
I'm all set. Thank you.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about safety drills. So
I can speak to it. So there's a list of safety drills. So we have evacuations, reverse evacuations, shelter in place, lockdown, secure schools. Those are all, they're logged when they took place in each building. There's a required number of each that should take place. There are also visits by plainclothes police officers to try to access the buildings. We don't tell the administration or staff when they're trying to access the building, and then we do get a report back from the chief, and then there's discussion with the administration should they be able to access the building. That happens a couple times a year throughout the year. So those events take place. Someone questioned and said, well, do the police show up for those events? Does the fire department show up for those events? They can, and they have. They don't show up for all of them, but if asked, they would. There definitely is something that we need to do for consistency, because having a drill once, people don't remember what to do during a drill in an actual event. So those take place in all schools, and as I said, they're logged. A little bit about access control. Every staff member has a badge, similar to what I'm wearing, and that badge is able to get into all the buildings at certain locations. It's only on at certain times of the day, though. So we can access the badge for a few hours, a day, certain days of the week, different buildings. If you're access to one building, does not mean you have access to all the buildings. So any staff member would have an access badge to enter the building, and then we have a log of them entering the building. There's also that students entering the high school now carry IDs. Students entering the high school enter in one doorway, and then there's limited entry points at all other buildings. That is for the sake of knowing who's entering and when they're entering the building. Once they're entered the building, the only way to enter any of our buildings is through, unless the door is propped or jarred open, but there's a security staff member in each building, at least one. At the high school, there's multiple. There's camera systems in the district. We have over 350 cameras within the district. Though that camera system can be monitored by the security person, there also has the ability for the police to access our camera system should they need to in an event. But with entering the building, once the school day starts, the only way to access the building is through a security vestibule. Those were put in 4 to 5 years ago also. That's an entryway where you enter the building and you're stuck in that vestibule until someone buzzes you in or you get clearance to come into the building. I want to talk about that for a moment. There's two different types we have visitors. A visitor we clarify as an individual that is not working directly with students. So if you came to watch a show and you're sitting in the audience, you're a visitor. If you're going into a classroom and you're working with students, you're now a volunteer. Two different levels of security for both. A visitor entering the building would go through what's called our Raptor system, and it looks at for sex offenders. You have to produce a license, you get a printed badge, you have to wear the badge in the building, and your access to the building is limited, as I said, if you're going to a show or event. If you're a volunteer, we actually do a background check on the individual before we allow them into the building. Two different levels of clearance of who's allowed in the building. The other part that I've had discussion with some parents is if we have an event, such as a concert, and we have staff there, we typically do not use the Raptor system because it becomes too cumbersome. But they're coming in for an individual event. They're not to be wandering the building. There is a definitive reason that they're there, and it's a public event. Same thing that we do for sporting events and things, people have access to the building. And that's something to talk about later on. You saw probably in the newspaper, town next to us is talking about metal detectors. We've talked about that also. That's one of the items that will come up later on this agenda as a future discussion point. To ensure who's accessing the building. That's a huge safety risk. So if the Coca-Cola man comes to put water in the water machine, they have to produce a license. It doesn't have to be the same person every time. They don't just get let in. So it is a security measure that is consistent as far as I'm aware. I'm not going to tell you that when we deal with the plainclothes officers over the years, and I don't say recently, that there has been glitches, but that's why you do those, so you work out any possible issues that could be present.
Thank you. So I think we should talk about the radio system next, but I definitely want to hear from the mayor a little bit on this, because I know the town council, this went through you guys.
Yes.
And, a lot on the town end. And this was a pretty significant thing that the board needed, requested, and you guys handled on your end. So do you want to talk a little bit about it and then pass it off?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Just from the town perspective, certainly as the mayor and the town council, we all put a very high, risk of things happening in today's world. So 5 years ago, when we started looking at school security, we definitely thought there was the need for many of the things we have now put in place. And you can't do it all at once. You can't do it all in 1 year. Obviously, there's funding to consider, but I don't think any of these assets that we have in place, our school resource officers, the radio system, everything we put in our school system over the last 5 years, as far as security goes, high priority for the council, high priority for spending your tax dollars on something that keeps certainly our town safe, our students, and our staff safe. So that's utmost importance to us. I don't think on the council we've ever turned down any funding requests for anything associated with the things you're hearing about tonight, and nor would we going forward. And I think Berlin, working with Superintendent Benigni, Julia, the Board of Ed over the past years, great cooperative effort. We always talk about these things. It's very important to all of us. It's probably the most important thing, unfortunately, in today's world. And, living in Connecticut, unfortunately, back in, I think 2013 with the unfortunate incident in Newtown and Sandy Hook, certainly brought it to the front of all of our minds. Back in those days, I was working in law enforcement. I did work a little bit on that investigation, and horrible what happened to it. Unfortunately, it took something like that for a lot of folks, even in law enforcement, to understand what could go wrong and what we needed to do to protect our towns and our students and children. So it's been very positive, and I think we've been very fortunate in Berlin. We've been lucky, and certainly I think we know a lot of these threats that we get. Social media, that's a killer today, right? Social media, everything gets out there fast. And but we do take everything seriously until we can decide whether it's a valid threat or not. Of course, we are, with the chief and John, and we are hooked up with the intelligence centers that are here in Connecticut that allow us to get some further information before we just make a snap decision on something a youngster may have said on social media. So it's just a little summary of everything, how we got here. And we got to a good place so far. We're at a very good place. You see the experts up here, the chief, John, the superintendent, Julie, and all of us work together, and we need the team effort to keep everybody safe. Thank you.
Just a little bit more, some questions that have come up in the past I want to try to address. Locking of doors and doors being shut. Before COVID, the protocol was to have all classroom doors locked and shut. We have, the town has, based on recommendations, all classroom doors have been rekeyed, and they're always in locked position. So when a teacher takes the key out, the door stays in a locked position. We do not require teachers to have the door shut, but the door is always ready to lock. So if something happened, they shut the door would be locked right away. And that's been the protocol that has been recommended by security, and that's what we have in place. But those doors are locked. The other part that's important, if you look at some of the doorways you used to see doorways where you have two handles where you be able to pull the handles open the doors. You'll only see one now on all the doors in the school district. And the reason why is because they could be chained shut. So that was a rope protocol that was put in place and a recommendation that's taken place. So over the last 5 years, some of these things have been done just because they've been recommendations, and the town as well as the boards decided to fund them because the recommendations of how to ensure that something doesn't happen.
We've also made sure that we've utilized state grants as well. I believe the vestibules were part of a state grant initiative.
Some of the cameras were too.
Some of the cameras, and what about the things that are out in front of the schools? Bollards,
The bollards were also.
I think they
Yep.
were too part of the grant.
So we're constantly looking at what can we take advantage of. Ashley Dorsey has been great about bringing things forward. And then, our state rep Donna Vichu is here this evening. She's always reported back on state grants that she's taken advantage of, same with Jack Fazzino. And so, this is truly a collective effort here to make sure that, we're not just checking the boxes, we're ensuring the safety of every single student, staff and faculty member, and the overall community. But the radio systems that we do have in the schools are monitored by police. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
There's one at the desk.
Yeah, the radio systems are monitored by our dispatch center, which is open 24 hours a day, 375 days a year, or 365 days a year, excuse me. And if something's happening at the school, they can patch right into us, and as our officers or personnel are responding, we can hear what's happening, which is a big tactical advantage for us as well.
Thank you.
It's important to note that there's behavioral threat and crisis intervention teams at each building with regular meetings, and then they meet as needed should a crisis arise. There are cameras on the buses. Granted, they're not the best cameras if there's been issues, but there are cameras on the buses when we can get NBT to get us the copies of those cameras for safety. Currently, we have 7 armed security staff. We have 1 SRO, 1 armed security staff in the district. And all of the first floor windows have been coated with a 3M security film on doors and windows on the first floor. It's not a bulletproof, but it is like a shatter, so it does help if something was to get thrown at the window or shot at the window. So those are just some measures that are currently in place that I'm not sure people are aware of without getting into more detail.
So
If I missed anything? I don't
would anyone, before we move on to next steps that are being researched, is there anything that any of you at the table would like to talk about regarding our current procedures? Okay, so moving on to next steps, I will let those who are working on that continue discussing, but I will say that, we are having ongoing discussion with town leaders as we look at what's currently happening in our state, surrounding communities, as well as the nation, about do we need to add more? Like Officer McNally said, I'm sorry, did I say it right?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, so what our police chief had said, these are living, breathing documents. We need to make sure that, they're constantly being revisited. And so if more measures need to be put in place, especially as technology changes, it's important to bring it back to the table, especially as budget season approaches, and we don't want to take away from the operational budget of our school district, and the town council has funded that on the town side for our school security measures, which is really important, and it's really important to mention. So, we're laying out all these procedures we have in place, but it's not coming at the expense of the students and our regular operational budget. Though it's at the expense of the taxpayers, and it's coming through the town budget. So now I can turn it over to anyone here who would like to discuss our next steps being researched.
John, do you want to speak to those?
Yeah.
I can add in. I know Matt could add in also on those.
Yeah, some of the stuff we're looking forward to, technology changes all the time, and looking at communication systems internally where you could send an alert out via your ID tag. You have a distress call, so administrators, security be notified. And the best part about it, I don't want to call it GPS, but it's located inside the building. So if a nurse is having a problem, they hit the button, and the resources go to that location. If you had a lockdown situation, any staff member of the building can activate it. So the school goes on a lockdown, identifies the location where security is going to respond. The administrators are going to go into their lockdown procedures. We could communicate with the police department where the distress call was coming from. They come up with a tactical response to respond to it. And the system identified last year was the one that was used down in Georgia 2 or 3 weeks ago. So it's a proven system. And again, money's money, but to me it's an affordable thing. It's not a multi-million-dollar project. That's something we're looking at. Other stuff we're looking at is artificial intelligence, and it's twofold. One of them is a weapons detection type system. Any weapon displayed internally or on the curtilage of the campuses would alert the police and school security, causing a lockdown, and address the situation. Police department has the ability to monitor our cameras under emergency situations. And also the artificial intelligence would be beneficial on the inside when students go missing, not for just skipping classes, but you have a student who has medical issues, emotional issues, anxiety, stress type stuff, be able to find them when they don't show up at a class. Instead of searching the bathrooms, the hiding places, the infrastructure in here. So that's another thing we're seriously considering. And the last thing, which everybody talks about, is metal detectors. Metal detectors aren't what they used to be. The more technology, you go to a ball game, you go to any large event, you walk into a metal detector, you don't got to empty your pockets. And again, it's designed to identify weapons and along those lines. And again, we're looking for portable ones. So if you had a contentious Board of Ed meeting, we could screen people coming into the building. If you had to do it at a football game, you had concerns there. So it's a variety of technologies that we're looking at. And these are the primary ones we're looking at, is the technology, again, to be a step ahead. And Brian always asks me, well, what are other districts doing? And I tell him, I don't care what other districts are doing, because I want to be a cut above. I want to be the cutting edge. When somebody asks, what are you doing? Check with Berlin. I was like that when I was with the Hartford Police Department. People would say, what's Hartford doing with whatever? And they would come to us because we were light years ahead of a lot of other area departments. And I want this school district safety and security to be the model for everybody else, not a copycat. So that's about it.
I could just add, there's one system here with IT. It's called Securely, and we currently have it. And what it does, it monitors any of our school devices whenever a student's on them. It looks at their address, what they're looking up. There's buzzwords. There's certain things that it targets. Right now, we pay for this system, but it's a nominal fee. And our IT staff has to manually go through and find any of this information. They do, of course, have an upgrade where it's automated 24/7. And if one of these target words or a student is in danger of hurting themselves or hurting others, it would then contact one of the administrators or whoever's designated, and then we'd contact the parent, the appropriate authority. And it's 24/7, 7 days a week. Or you can look at it and just make it, till 8 o'clock at night or whatever. And we're discussing that right now, whether that's something we should have in place anytime a student is on, if they're on the Chromebook, anything that's a school-issued device.
Would either of you like to share about any next steps being researched?
Chief, anything?
I think this is a pretty comprehensive list.
Yeah. It's covered quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's great.
So the last
Appreciate you guys.
The last one.
No,
Thank
go ahead.
you.
No.
So the last thing, Mrs. Menta, do you have it? So the last thing we just want to bring up and bring to everyone's attention and address for clarity, because I think this piece is of critical importance, especially if there's miscommunication around this. So last spring, the Board of Ed discussed our cell phone policy throughout the district, particularly for middle school and high school, what that looks like. So cell phones are getting in the way of learning. Some teachers use them, some teachers still want that autonomy, but it is a huge distractor. A lot of the threats we're seeing right now are from social media. I personally, as a teacher, was reluctant to even put something in place like this, because what if there is an emergency? You know, in the community I teach in, I did teach while there was a Snapchat bomb threat that went through the school while I was teaching, and we were stuck outside for 4 hours. So I brought my perspective, and I did say I was concerned. However, now that I see everything I'm seeing on the news, but I also experience the constant distraction of the phones, I personally was in a tough place. Some board members were really for it, some were a little apathetic to it, and we had a really productive conversation and discussion, and which came out of that was we got every teacher at BHS those boxes, and what those boxes do is the students come in, they put their phone in. So if the school does get evacuated, if there is a lockdown, if they get moved, the teacher can take it and bring it with them, and then just pass the phones right back out. And as someone who, did outwardly express my reluctance with taking phones away and banning them and so on and so forth, I actually really supported that. I've had teachers from BHS stop me in public places. I don't even know that they're teachers, and they say, thank you so much. And, students may not care for them because, they like their phones, which I do understand. However, I think it has been very productive. And, I think it is important that if there is a serious threat, there are times where students shouldn't be on their phones, because that's how rumors do spread, but at the same time, students need to communicate with their families, so you have the ability to do both. So you have more flexibility with that. So that's what it looks like. I know that there were some things, stewing on social media about, I don't want my child's phone taken away. What if this happens? But if this does happen, they can easily access their phone. And I think, but again, the teachers have the autonomy to do so and to utilize it. So phones shouldn't be out during the class. If kids are keeping their phones away and putting them away for the duration of the class, then I don't think we would have gotten to this point. So that's that on the cell phone boxes.
Two more items, if
Yep.
you could. One thing we're struggling with is the access to schools after hours. So during the school day, as I said, all doors are locked. There's one entrance. You have to get buzzed in. You're in through the Raptor system, and that's the only way to enter the building. Once the school day ends, and the buildings are used for the town, for town events, basketball clubs, and so on, the doors are then opened after hours, and that's how they access the building. So that's something we're talking about, how to ensure the safety of students, not during the school day, but also when they come back for events, and that really anyone could walk into the buildings during that time. So that's one of the items we're still talking about. And the other I want John to speak a little about, I did receive an email about a training called ALICE training, and some districts are looking at ALICE training, and they have implemented it. And we did talk about it several times, but I want John to share his insight on ALICE. So if you could share a little about what it is, John, and where we're at with it.
Yeah, ALICE training was basically run, hide, fight, and people customize it to be ALICE: alert, lockdown, inform, counter, and evacuate. There's a lot of good components to talk about, training staff. The biggest deficiency in any school district is the amount of time to train for school safety, because you got so many legislative mandates, policy mandates, and so forth. So there's not a whole lot of time to train staff extensively. Law enforcement tactical teams will train 2 or 3 times a month. Military train for months on end still deployments. And in schools, you just don't have that luxury of time. And looking at ALICE, blocking the doorway, how to thwart an attacker coming into a room, that's stuff you could teach, but there's other stuff. When you talk about the evacuation, people say, I tell my kids to get out of the school. So if you had a shooting in the lobby there and you had a body laying there, or multiple bodies laying there bleeding, You had the venous bleeding, the arterial bleeding, the different colors of blood, people aspirating, people moaning and groaning. Do you think you or your children will be able to run past without stopping and looking and endangering them? So if you're in a safe location, in a secure location, and out of sight, out of mind, you're generally safer. If you look at Stony Douglas, if you go online, Stony Douglas computer simulation has an automated computer simulation of the shooter going through the building, and the doors that are open, if he saw humans in there, he shot them. If he didn't see them, he didn't shoot them. He didn't go into the rooms. And when some students tried leaving the flight to evacuate themselves, they were caught in a hallway, and multiple of them were shot. So my philosophy is, and again, people could argue this both ways, and I could see both points, but my experience, I seen a video from Stony Douglas with a student. She videotaped her evacuation out of the class with the law enforcement guiding them, and they had to step over student bodies. So you really think you're going to be able to take 10 or 15 kids, whether high school students or kindergarten kids, and go past bodies laying there bleeding? So stay safe, let law enforcement guide you. So that's part of the decision-making process that I have. You're going to talk to other people, get out of the building. And again, if you're standing near a doorway and there's a lockdown, hopefully the student's been trained and staffed to go to primary evacuation point, secondary evacuation point. But you're not going to get, if you're leaving a point of safety, you don't know what's in the hallway, you don't know what's outside the door. You can't communicate in a timely manner. When I was at the university, I had clear requirements. People through social media would know more what's going on than the administration calling my office or calling this public safety department what's going on. We haven't even arrived on scene, and people coming up with scenarios of what's going on. So you got to think these things through. And again, my experience in Hartford, reading people when you're at a shooting, in a hallway, in an alley, at a special event, when I say mass shooting, 3 or 4 people shot. I'm not talking about the school shootings. I've never been to that. But a lot of us seen the way people act, how they respond. And that's where my basis of knowledge comes from. It's not from reading in a book, watching a PowerPoint. It's actually being as a patrolman, a sergeant, a lieutenant, and watching how people respond, whether they're in uniform, the ambulance attendants. And I just think it's human nature. Unless you're exposed to it all the time, there may be veterans in the audience, immediate action drill, they know what to do. But we're not going to be able to train to that level. So there's certain components of ALICE that will be implemented. There's other parts to be reviewed. But like we talked before, it's an ongoing process. It's not, oh, we decided against it, it's dead. Because the ALICE training when I first looked at it, when I first came here, has changed in the past 5 years with updates. And again, it's an option that's out there, and I think we have a pretty sound program. If you're in a safe location, stay there until law enforcement guides you out of that area.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to add any thoughts before we open it up to the members of the audience? Okay, so if you have any questions or comments for us, we just ask that you come forward, state your name and address, and if we don't have an answer for you, we will write down the information and get back to you. But we'll do our best to answer questions this evening. And is the microphone on?
I don't
Okay,
think so.
just making
It
sure.
is on?
Yep.
Okay. I want to start with thanking Mrs. Selena and Mr. Cheverini. As a lot of people know, they're both new to our school at Willard. And since they've joined, so many things have changed in a positive way. And honestly, I'm a very involved mom. Everybody knows who I am. And I'm just so thankful to have them and honestly proud to have them. So thank you guys so much. I also want to thank Brian for always answering the phone when I call. If he doesn't answer, calling me right back, because I really do appreciate that. I have quite a few questions, 1, 2, 3, 4 questions and a comment. Do you want me to read them one at a time? Do you want?
We'll see.
Okay. What's an average response time?
Who would like to answer that one?
I'll answer that, but you're not going to like my answer because you don't know where the officers are responding from. They could be responding from Patterson Way. They could be responding from Kensington. They can be responding from on the Meriden border. So there is no such thing as an average response time. Fast. As fast as possible.
As fast as possible. Well, I understand too, because you'd have to be notified. Then you have to find people, then send them, so.
They have retired police officers working in Berlin also, but you have a person who has 20 years on the job. You may have somebody responding with 2 or 3 years on the job, so you have that basis of knowledge of contain, control, isolate, emergency management, tactical response. So you have resources that, or could be one room away or could have to, run across down a hallway to get there. So there is an instantaneous response when there's an armed security in the school, and the communication, like we spoke of earlier, going directly to the PD. So police response may be 1 minute away, maybe 15 minutes away. Depends what's going on. And again, keep in mind what happened today. You had those 4 incidents at the schools. I spoke to Cromwell Police, and they had to respond to that by themselves. They didn't have the mutual aid. They didn't have Middletown come in, Rocky Hill, Berlin. They had to take care of that issue themselves. So this is all part of our planning process that's thought out and identified. So the chief is right, but you also got to keep in mind you have resources dedicated inside the building, and very seldom does the school not have an armed security officer inside of it.
John Inho, we forgot him. I don't know how, but John Inho, I love that man. I truly adore him. My entire family adores him. Actually, my uncles know him from growing up. He's a phenomenal guy. I don't think there's anybody in our school who would dislike John. I trust him 100% with my kids, and I mean, they can tell you, even on days where I'm very unsure, I trust John 100%.
Person at Willard. Okay, just so everybody knows
Yes,
who John
John is our security officer, and he is phenomenal. I love that man, truly. And also very thankful for him, honestly.
But Jessica, to your point, like when we were putting the armed security in place, that was our vision for our armed security. We wanted them to be a part of the school community. We wanted the kids and the families to know them and adore them. And so it's actually really nice, like 5 years later, seeing it come full circle. So thanks for sharing that.
You're welcome. John can't ever retire, so I don't know what you guys are going to do to keep him, because I know he's on his way out, but we got a lot of families that are going to fight that. So what's considered after hours? Are after hours when the school day is over, so Willard is 3:25, or is that after the YMCA program has concluded?
The hours are different at each building for after hours. It's not immediately after the school day. So students in when it happened at the middle school, let's say, it wouldn't be, athletics would still be coming back. But if there was an event, like a basketball practice, that door is going to get opened probably anywhere from 15 minutes before the practice so they can enter the building. And then it remains open until that time is expired. Then the custodian would lock it. So if basketball practice runs till 9:30 and starts at 5:30, then the building's be open probably at 5:15. It's going to open up and it's not going to be shut until 9:45 at the end of the time.
So 9:45 would be considered the end
The
of
end,
the day?
because it's over at 9:30, 15 minutes after, within, typically the custodian is not holding the door to let them out, but relatively, they're going to clean up whatever, yes.
But so you're counting in any after-school activities are
That's when,
within that?
that's when
Okay.
the door becomes open because they have to have access to the building.
Okay.
At the high school, that's not how it works. The high school, we've only done this 2 years, John?
3 years.
3 years, for the last 3 years at the high school. Because it's used so frequently, we do have a security staff member on at night. The only entrance to enter the building is the front entrance, and they're handled the same way, what they're entering for. But it still poses an issue at times because you could have multiple events, and we're not raptoring everyone to come into a volleyball game and parent conferences and so on. But there is an armed person, there's an armed security staff at that desk, and there's one way in. Obviously, there's multiple ways out, as our doors are not, but there is a camera system that's monitoring. So it's just a level of security that's available at that time.
Okay. So if someone in our district makes a threat, what are the repercussions for that person?
Well, there'd be a repercussion by the school, so some disciplinary consequence in the school. There also could be legal repercussions with the law, as you're hearing what's happening to some of these students who do that. And, I did specify in what I wrote about some of the things that could happen should a student swatting and they're caught swatting and sending out a message. But, there's varying levels of consequences, including all the way up to expulsion.
Okay. So just a comment about the phone case. I'm not a fan of the phone case. It doesn't really matter because my kids are not in high school, so we don't have the issue. I personally don't agree with it. I agree 100% cell phones should not be used in the classroom. I agree 100% that it has to be incredibly difficult to teach while you have these kids doing who knows what on their cell phones, even cheating. What the answer is, I don't know. I don't agree with it, because at the end of the day, God forbid, if there is an emergency, what if the teacher forgets to grab it? What if the teacher doesn't have time to grab it? What if the teacher feels like it's her control whether she wants to give it, or he or she wants to give it to you or not? So I personally disagree. Just a comment. And now my last question is, I'm not sure if you can answer this. If you can, I would love for you to. What deems a threat credible or not credible?
Okay, that's a good one.
That's yours, Matt.
Should I sit down for
So
this
we
one?
actually have a matrix that we use, and just to keep it clear, so we have non-specific threats, like for schools, there'll be a social media post, a anonymous tip, any kind of generalized statement that's non-specific. You know, an example, today in Connecticut, we're gonna bomb a school. And now you've got every district having to respond to that non-specific threat. Rumors, you know, the old game of telephone. I heard something, I tell him, he tells her, but between me and her, it changes. She works, and that's what happens with a lot of the stuff that's getting filtered through. So it's making it hard for us to investigate these because they're so non-specific. A more credible threat would be if somebody called up and said, I put a device on in the third floor ceiling of this building, and it's going to go off at 10 a.m. That's more of a specific threat, which we would respond. You know, we respond to all of them, but we're going to respond in a different mode. So it's kind of you got to weigh out all the factors, like who's making the call, where'd the call come from, did you get a caller ID? Was it a note left in the bathroom from yesterday? Did somebody write on a mirror? Over my career, I've seen a lot of different ways that schools have gotten threats that are not somebody picking up the phone and calling in, or somebody wrote something in a notebook because they've got some problems and they're not happy, or maybe they're in a bad relationship and they wrote, I really can't stand these people, tomorrow I want to kill them. That's pretty specific to us, and we would have to handle that. And they left their notebook out and somebody saw that. So it's really a scale that we have to look at, and every one of them we have to measure. If we had the same threat as another district and another district, and you see the same types of background noise or the way the vernacular is or speech or something like that, that's going to lend more credibility to what our response is going to be. So we share this information across the country. A threat being made in the middle of the country could be affecting us here in Berlin. And it's so broad that we have to always lean on the side of caution. So we always take every one of them seriously. Does that answer the question? Kind of. I know you're not happy with that answer either.
You're right. However, also you made a comment about juveniles. If juveniles are making these threats, I think you said on Snapchat or whatever, that you guys can't take their phone. What is the reasoning behind it?
I can't take your phone either if you're making threats as an adult. We have to get a search warrant. Okay. Our juvenile justice system is very different than our adult justice system in this state. And without getting into a whole semester of teaching this to you, I can just tell you that when we deal with juveniles, there's so many other things that we can do non-judicial. We have a juvenile review board in town. The school has sanctions that they can do. And we can't do some of the law enforcement techniques that we use in our regular criminal investigations with juveniles anymore, because some of the laws have changed over the years. Every legislative session, there's something in there about juveniles, and juveniles under 18.
That's the problem.
So it does kind of thwart us on some of our investigations. That's really the truth. Is some of the stuff, if I had somebody of age, there's certain things I can do, make an arrest, no problem, if I have probable cause. With a juvenile, it's a lot tougher.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Who else would like to approach us with a question or comment?
She had all the list.
Oh, we have some others.
Hi,
Just state your name and address.
Jen DeGrande, 147 Still Meadow Lane. Just to agree with this lady here, I'm not a fan of the phone box because they've already proven to be inconsistent. One, because of the price. I think it could have been money spent better elsewhere. Two, I do believe that each teacher can have their own responsibility of handling the cell phone. I've experienced it with my daughter, who's now a graduate, and my son, and they've handled it quite well. That being said, I want to know what is the process of notifying parents when there is an emergency. BHS has had 3 different fire alarms, and I don't get an email until 2 to 3 hours later about it. Is there a plan if there is an even bigger emergency, because those weren't drills, those were alarms, to notify parents through text message? Because not every parent works at a desk with an email, but every parent has their cell phone on them that will ding to see that Berlin Public Schools is notifying them because there's an emergency at your child's school.
I can speak to that for a moment. Best practice, and we have a document here put out by the Department of Justice and everything, is not to notify the parents immediately. The best practice is to handle the situation, make sure the situation's safe, make sure the students are safe, then to notify the parents. So we've been using email as the messaging so we don't interrupt with the voicemail, because what we don't want to do, and this is why I said initially, we just sent it out to McGee, or I sent it out to McGee, because it was just McGee that was mentioned. What we don't want to do is send out so many that people start to think, oh, it's just another message, we're not going to see it, we're not going to see it. So the question, the second part was, what if it was something of a drastic degree? You would get a voicemail from either myself or a principal saying, we're in this and this is what's happening, because you know when you get a voicemail, it's usually a cancellation of school. It's something at that level, that magnitude. And we want to keep the voicemails at that magnitude. I know that Matt and John are able to speak further about what best practice is, but in everything I've been through, and I don't know as much as these 2 gentlemen, it's handle the situation first, make sure students are safe, make sure staff is safe, situation under control, and then to notify parents.
Okay, just because I found that it's inconsistent, because now the students are evacuated from the building and they do not have their cell phones to contact their parents. So that's why I was wondering if there could be a better, like 3 hours later to get an email.
Let me just speak to the cell phones if I could for a moment. Just that both of you spoke about cell phones. At the middle school, we've had a practice in place since I was the principal, and I think it works fairly well. The practice is simply this. Cell phones are not to be seen or heard throughout the school day. If they are the first time, it's taken. At the end of the day, you come to the office. The student comes to the office. They get their cell phone, and no harm, no foul. You don't do it again. Everything's good. If it happens again, now the parent has to come and get it. That's the middle school. The high school boxes, though, and I spoke at the State Department of Education. I was asked to speak. The governor came about our cell phone practice they're putting in place. And I also spoke with the Torrington superintendent. They have a much different process than we have. They have a bag. When you walk into school at the beginning of the day, the student puts their cell phone into the bag. It is sealed. They don't get that cell phone back until the end of the day. At the high school here, when they walk into class where the learning is taking place, the cell phone is in the box. When the period ends, they take the cell phone back. It's theirs in the hallway during passing until the next class. Then it goes back into the box. They get it back in the hallway, lunchtime, study hall. They have their cell phone. Much different than other districts. You know, they called it, the State Board of Ed called it Berlin Light. My comment back was, it works. So, you know, I think where we are is a good hybrid between where some districts are going and other districts are. And speaking, I've taught at a collegiate level for the last 20 years. And cell phones, even at the college level when students have heavily graduated, are an issue for many students to stay focused within that class period. So if anything, we're teaching students for the 60 or 90-minute class, don't look at your cell phone, just pay attention, and then you get it back in the hallway, do your quick texting, whatever you gotta do, it's yours, then it goes back in, next minutes. So I think it's a good compromise in between. So that's the position.
Well, I'm not opposed to any of that, and I agree with all of that.
Okay.
My disagreement is with it because I have heard through the grapevine rumors that it is very inconsistent. Some teachers carry them out the building. Some teachers hand the kids the phones when they're when these fire drills happen. Some kids don't get their cell phones because they have to go meet at their Red Sea advisor and the teacher didn't give out the phones. It seems very inconsistent.
Great feedback, and Mrs. Abenta is sitting right behind you, and we'll look into it, because it should be consistent. It's now a school-wide policy. Last year it was certain teachers did it, and now we've made it a school-wide policy. So I appreciate the feedback.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Who else would like to approach? Yeah, go ahead.
Please.
Just state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Jillian Aslin. I live at 211 Main Street in East Berlin. My question is the district currently utilizing any apps as a way for students or parents to submit threats that they've come across? I know that other districts, I forget the name, there's two that I have on my computer at home. But if we are not using an app to submit those, how does the information come to you guys? The Snapchat thing, was that something that the police department found on their own, or something that a student brought to a parent or an authority? How did that come about? And then how do they go about sharing the information that they come across?
Let me speak to the apps first, and I'll let you go. So we have looked at a few apps, and districts that are currently using them are having a real difficult time with them. So we've not gotten good feedback from districts we checked with. Our IT director would have been here tonight. He's on vacation. He's been with the district 25 years. He's excellent and knowledgeable. So we are looking at the apps. We'd like to have some type of system to do that. We just don't want it to become, what's happening in some districts becoming so cumbersome that they can't keep up with the information that's coming in. So it's almost so you have to have an individual who's just
to monitor it.
Right.
Sure.
Right. Matt, please.
So let me just talk on the rumors, right? So Snapchat. I don't have a Snapchat, but a lot of people do. And the reason why they use Snapchat is because what you put in Snapchat disappears after a period of time. Or so you're told. Except the truth is, if we did a search warrant on a cell phone and or on a computer, a tablet, whatever you're using that's app-based, the technology and forensics, IT forensics in particular, existed, nothing ever is deleted. But what we have is we have people who go, say, to the Pop Warner football game, and the parents are talking, and oh, my son told me that he had this Snapchat with a picture of an AR-15. And then that parent says, oh, well, would you do it then? Well, I didn't see it, but that's what he told me. Well, did you ask your kid to see the phone? Well, you know, I don't want to be invading their privacy. Some parents do this. Some parents say, hey, let me see this. Well, you know, the reason why the kids got Snapchat, they don't want you to see all the stuff they're doing, right? So then we didn't get the picture of the AR-15 as evidence. That's where we get that non-specific threat that I mentioned earlier about. So now I have another parent, not the parent whose kid has the supposed Snapchat, but the parent who talked to the parent who decides, hey, this is a police matter, and calls the police. And that would be, in the criminal courtroom, that's hearsay because they're not the victim or the suspect or whatever. So, but that's how we get these complaints. It's almost like social media telephone. So we get these complaints, and then we have to backtrack. And usually, as we try to backtrack, we try to get the information. You know, it would have been nice if we saw the Snapchat, if we could get these Snapchats. I mean, we're sharing information across the state. We're sharing information tonight, right before I walked in here, about a potential for threats tomorrow all over the country. And it's very nonspecific. That's what's making these cases so hard. But I do want to point out that in Connecticut last week, 3 juveniles were arrested for threatening schools. So we got them. We got 3, not we didn't get them, but 2 agencies around us did. And that's a lot of investigative work. And it would be nice if we could get all the information, you know, if we could get the pictures, if we could get, a threat used to be something you had to verbalize. Now it's just a picture. You know, a threat today is a kid going like this, oh, that's a gun. You know, or the little kid that drew the stick, and oh, I thought that was a gun. And that threat comes out, and we have to respond to it because you never know what the intent is. So we have to, that's what a whole, trying to figure out, well, is this really credible or is it not credible? And then we use matrices to determine that. I wish it was easier. It's not easier. Technology's getting farther ahead. You know, you heard about AI and stuff tonight. We hear about it every day in our working lives. We're trying to keep up with technology, but technology's moving faster than humans are moving. You know, everybody knows a little bit, but nobody ever has the full picture. And that's what we're trying to work with now.
Thank you. So is there a formal place that students are aware to tell someone in the school of a threat that they are made aware of?
Adult in the school, it's a custodian, myself, or anybody else. Tell your student, tell an adult, and it starts. If you have information at home and say your student texts you something, contact the police department. Contact them because they could call us right away. We got a report of this going on. Again, been trivial incidents, but it's happened before where they contact us or we contact them to find out the information. If you're ever in doubt, contact the police. If you have concerns from a student who's inside the building, have them contact an adult immediately. Somebody called last week asking about the 2 fire alarms at the high school that went off because of a malfunction of a hood vent in the cafeteria. And you know, we got reported somebody's waiting to shoot him outside. Well, did your student tell anybody? That was the conversation with a retired police officer who mans the front desk here. So again, see something, say something. It sounds corny, but it works. I'd rather take 10, 15, 20 calls a day than have like, why didn't you call? The same thing in your own personal life. You see somebody doesn't belong in the neighborhood, call. Let the police do their job. That's what they're there for.
Yeah.
So please call. Never hesitate to call or tell your student. Tell an adult right away, and you could do the same thing. If your student tells you, tell an adult, call the PD. My son just told me this, or my daughter told me this. Get the information out there. Don't sit on it. Because Chief talks about the criminal prosecution, which is irrelevant to me at this point, but evidence preservation. And again, if you're involved, take a picture of it. Whatever you could do, preserve it. Get some investigative information that they can move forward on. So it's better to have it and not need it than not do anything. We take pictures of everything at the university, the police departments, to stay ahead of the curve. So it's very important that you contact us. And again, I understand this social media tech, everything's on an app. You know, you buy your groceries on an app, you know, everything's on an app. That'd be great to have. Like I said, sometimes it's overburdened in the day-to-day communications of, you know, educational institute. So please use the phone and call and contact. And again, go ahead, Mark.
This is a good time for me to jump in. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Officer Mark Pinto. I'm the school resource officer for the Berlin schools. I work every day here in Berlin High.
Mark. You have to use that.
They're recording you.
You gotta record it too.
Just like our
I don't like to use the mic.
body cams.
I'll start over. Hey, so I'm Officer Mark DePinto. I'm the school resource officer for the Berlin Public Schools. I work every day at Berlin High. That's where my office is. But if anything happens at any of the other schools, I'm at McGee regularly. And even if things go on at the elementary school, which they sometimes do, I have a real great working relationship with all the administrators and with everyone up here. But to your point about, you know, police getting information, I've been an officer in Berlin for 10 years now, and a lot of times we'll go on a call and someone will say, well, I didn't want to bother you, but this made me feel weird, or this was suspicious, right? So many people in Berlin apologize for calling the cops because they think we're bothering us. And my answer is, you're never bothering us. Like, let us do our job. We would rather get the information ahead of time, even if it turns out to be unfounded or to be, you know, nothing. We'd rather get that information and be able to kind of put a cap on it before something happens. We're really good at sharing information. The patrol officers at Berlin that work the nights and work the weekends, if they get something that happens when I'm at home involving students, or even something at their house that maybe involves their parents that could carry over into school, I get the reports. So if something happens with your students or with your family outside of school hours, I'm made aware of it, because we know sometimes those things kind of carry over. Anyone that I'll get my email out to you guys. So if something happens on the school bus, in the neighborhood, involving kids from the school, let me know so that we can kind of put a cap on that before it kind of, you know, bubbles over into school. Questions, threats, if your kid's having a rough time adjusting, let someone know at the school. Let the guards know at the elementary schools and the middle schools. Someone earlier talked about how great John is, and they're all great, right? They all kind of choose this job, right? They're retired, but they're working with kids because it's rewarding. Right? Because it's rewarding. So making those relationships is huge. If something's bothering your kid, have an adult know. If someone says something that maybe not is a specific threat, but makes them feel uncomfortable, let the adults know, let us know, so that we can look into it and kind of put our plan of action into place.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to ask us any questions or comments. Just state your name and address.
Absolutely. Sarah Kowalczyk, 962 Chamberlain Highway. So first off, thank you for the information tonight. I'm sure I'm not the only parent who has their kids coming into their room in the middle of the night saying, what if? So being able to answer some of their questions is going to be helpful. Recent incident at McGee, though, there was two main things that were crossing my mind for questions. One of them we've kind of talked about a little bit, but the first one, the way the email was drafted, there was a potential threat. There was fire alarms and there was a potential threat. And in my head, I was trying to figure out what is safe for you guys to divulge to us about what said potential threat is. Is somebody going to trip my kid going down the stairs, or is somebody threatening to bring firearms in? Is there a safe way to provide a little bit more information on what that threat is? Because we as parents have very limited time to make what we think is the best decision based on very little information. And it's hard.
You don't want to put out information ahead of time that turns out to be inaccurate. You know, if you had a report, hey, you got a gun in Berlin High School, and sent that information out, tended to be false, how many of you would have a heart attack or drive here, have an accident, or clog up the streets? So again, my experience at the police department is one thing, but at the university, the same. You know, higher ed's a different thing, because you have no control over your students there, because they're, you know, around the corner, 100 miles away from you, 1,000 miles away. So you want to put, any investigation is confirm or dispel the report that you have. So until it's confirmed or dispelled what the complaint is, it's not prudent to put out that information, because you're going to create a false sense of security, like, oh, they said everything was fine, and there could be a tragic outcome because you want to jump the gun. That's what, there's no politicians in this room. I know we have a mayor here, but I know he's not a politician. They want to get in front of the cameras. They want to get in front of the microphone. They want to tell everybody what's going on, because I know everything. And when something bad happens, oh, it's his fault. So we don't want to do that. I won't give them information. I text Brian all the time. There's a fire alarm at the high school. This is at McGee. And the same thing to the administrators if they're not in the building. So the communication is in there, but to release it to the public at a point in time where you don't know for a fact that it's safe and secure, or it is an incident that you should be concerned about.
I think that it's important, you have my word, and that the lead administrators in the building, if there's something out, we will give you as much information as we can. So when a fire drill, which we've had, smoke heads that have malfunctioned and so on, if that's the case, we can mention it. It was a bad smoke head, it was a bad whatever, that's why the fire alarm was pulled. If we can say something that's the truth, that can eliminate anxiety, we will put that out. And we'll do it as a timely fashion as we can, but sometimes there's other things that we can't do as quick as people would like. And we can't say as much as people would like, and sometimes we don't know as much as you would like or we would like. But as I said initially, the goal for this forum is so that you gain information, and that hopefully there's an increased level of trust between parents, the community members, the students, and staff, that we're gonna give you as much as we can, and we're gonna keep looking for new ways to keep improving our security here in Berlin Public Schools.
And I will add, though, the night that he did send out that email, he did call me as a board chair, shared it with me, and explained that both him and the chief had worked together to establish that that was best communication, because I was asking certain questions. Well, why don't you just, if it's found to be unsubstantiated, like, why even put something out? Like, these are the questions, like, I was going through just to play all angles of it. And the two experts, the superintendent, the chief of police, established that message together. And so, when I was brought into the conversation, those were my questions too.
Let me just answer a little bit too. That decision process. So I get information, and my officers feed it to me and tell me what's going on, and I know the investigation's continuing. I can promise this group in here right now, I will always err on the side of caution as the chief of police in this town to notify the school system that we're in the middle of something. I don't have all the facts sometimes because we're at the very beginning of an investigation. And even though we're at the beginning of the investigation and it might turn out to be totally unfounded, I think it's very important to keep the school safe that we get something out. And that's what we did that night. On that Sunday night, I got to get something out, but it takes time to develop some of these leads, follow up on stuff, and sometimes it turns out to be nothing. But you're also looking at the environment that we've been in. The environment really dictated, okay, I've got to call the superintendent on Sunday night and tell him, listen, this is what we got going, and we're going to send more officers to your schools tomorrow, and we're going to up our response and how we handle the preventative side, and so we don't scare everybody, The mayor can tell you I text him on a lot of different things, and the town manager at night about things because, you know, not saying something, don't worry, I'll find it out on Berlin Buzz or Berlin Talks, and it's usually never right on there. And then it grows legs like a giant spider. But yet we're also stuck because we're in the investigation and we can't share certain parts. And there's some things I just can never share with the school system, you know, because of confidentiality. So, but I will always err on the side of caution and tell the school system, hey, we got something that might be happening at the school.
That's fair. And I think my next question, I think, is a little bit more of a comment because I hear you guys trying to answer some of these questions in response to you as well about what is credible, what isn't, how are you relaying the message. The other side of the coin is the parents sitting at home who kind of get the vague message. And I think everybody here understands that there's only so much you can share for purposes of safety, for purposes of future investigations, for making sure that other students don't try to find a loophole in what you guys are doing. But if there is information that can stop some of those spider webs from growing online and information that can be shared to say, listen, we've hit our threshold that we're very comfortable, that's what you guys try to relay. I really get that. But we get one or two sentences about why that's okay. So my request that I know you guys can't meet, so I'm sorry I request it, but if there's any information you guys can share at any point about this is why we got to this point. You know, this was something that was posted all over the country to every school district. We're not concerned. If there's anything that can kind of help us get to our decisions a little bit faster, that would be great. That's it. And I do like the boxes. I'm going to go against the grain.
Thank you. Thank you for that feedback as well. Would anyone else like to come speak to us?
Oh, we're going to this side now.
Yeah. Say your name and address.
Sarah Holland, 41 Angeli Court. It's okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about ALICE training. As an educator who has been trained in ALICE training and who has trained students in my classroom in ALICE training, I think it's very valid. There are age-appropriate videos that give a brief overview that you can show the children and then have discussions as an educator on different things that you would do in your classroom. I would like to urge you to try and reconsider and maybe look at that process a little bit more because I just think that if the kids on one side of the building are far enough away from the incident and can get out safely, then why would you not want them to be able to do that and want them to stay in a position where they might be in danger? I think it's great that we have armed security in all of our schools. I really appreciate that Berlin is invested in that. I just think that some of your comments about your concerns about ALICE might need to be relooked at. For instance, like when you said that the security guard was taking the kids through the bodies. I think a lot of that is in the training, it's kind of like the teachers are supposed to find a way out that's safe. So they can go out a door, they can also go out a window. So they wouldn't necessarily have to go past that or go anywhere near where the incident was. They could go out a different way. So I'd just like you to kind of see if you can relook into that maybe.
Thank you. And I think,
We always take a look at, that type of stuff, but how do you know it's safe when you go out the door? How do you know it's safe when you go out the door? Because you don't know that.
Right, so a big part of the training too is now, I don't know when the last time you looked at it was, but I just redid it with my classes like 2 weeks ago. A big part of the training now is dealing with clear communication. And in my schools, a lot of us have radios, so we can communicate very quickly. I don't know how many radios you have in each of your schools, and I don't know what the specifics are with that, but the training is like dealing a lot with clear communication, what the person is wearing, where they're located in the building, and it's given out quickly so that people can make that decision themselves. And if they're close to that situation, then you're staying in the classroom.
If you have that information, that's good, but you don't have that information immediately all the time. When you have an active shooter or a violent intruder, you generally don't have that information to make that decision. And let's say you take your class outside, you're going outside, you slip and fall, you break your ankle, you can no longer move. How are you going to get your students to the secondary evacuation point safely? I mean, it's a freak accident, maybe never happened, but those are considerations. Don't leave a point of, don't jump off the boat if it's not sinking. And again, there are certain circumstances, I agree with you. If you're in the lobby and you hear gunshots and you run outside, I think that's fine. But if you're leaving a point of safety to go into another point that you think is safe, and again, your path to travel, your fire, primary evacuation point, secondary evacuation point, do the windows open? Can the kids get out? Do you have kids with mobility issues? Do you have, hearing, eyesight types of situations? So a blanket approach, the concept I agree with, but to implement it across the boards, and again, if you're in a lockdown, you shouldn't be on the radio making noise and so forth. You may get the information when it's timely, but like I said, just my experience going to active shooters and seeing how people respond, and seeing how children respond to shooting victims, how adults respond, how family members respond, and watching parents arrive on scene. It's just personal knowledge and personal experience that I threw my 2 cents in there. I'm not saying Alice is garbage. Everything you said is legitimate, and maybe the training videos, maybe that's the way to go. But if you're leaving a point of safety, you got to assume the liability and live with the rest of your life that you saved 15 kids or you got 15 kids killed.
Yeah.
So those are decisions you have to make.
I just think it's another tool that they can have in their toolbox, like not saying that they would need to go. So I'm just saying it's valid too.
It is a concept, but like I said,
Correct.
the whole concept.
So I appreciate what you're saying, and I think it is important to consider more updated and all different things. Like we talked about, things are living, breathing documents. So my ask to you would be, in one of your monthly meetings with the Director of School Security as well as the Chief of Police, could you guys revisit this conversation and review some of the newer materials just to see if maybe some of it could be applied or not?
Yeah, absolutely. We're always looking at new resources, but Alice is not universal across the state in every school district. And it does have certain people that feel very strongly one or the other. I just think it's important to say that to you. And I'm not saying it's not practical in your school and the best practice with radios and so on, but we'll definitely look at it. We'll bring someone in and hear what they have to say. I can assure you that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come approach us?
Me again. I just have 2 really quick questions. Absences. So even like with the issue at McGee, if other families aren't comfortable, are their children's absences excused or unexcused?
Absences. Those are still absences from school. So when you elect to have your student not come to school, it's an absence. Whether it's excused or unexcused, we'll have to talk about that. We haven't gotten to that point. But at this point, just off the top, saying right here, it would still be an absence. It wouldn't be excused. If you wrote a note, it would be that you elected not to send your child to school. But a sick note means your child was sick that day. So you as a parent have a right not to send your school or to send your child to school until you get to a point of truancy. We could talk about the truancy law another time, what that means. So what I want to say to you is you have our assurance. We're going to tell you as much as we can about the incident. We're going to get you information in a timely manner. We're going to tell you what kind of security measures are going to be put in place. And then the expectation, as myself being a parent of 3, I'm going to make the best choice that I feel for my family based on the information I have. And that's the same thing I would expect parents to do here.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
No. To me, it doesn't matter either way. My kids missed 2 days, and whether they're
Right,
excused
so
or
they don't miss
unexcused,
it,
I don't really care. I was just curious.
It wouldn't matter unless they missed an excessive amount of days, whether it was excused or unexcused.
Okay. And also, I think Officer DePinto made a comment about speaking to the kids if there was an incident. And we did actually have an incident at our school. I'm not going to go into it. It ended up being not a problem at all. But my child ended up having some issues, I'll say, with what had transpired. And Tim and John pulled her in, and she left feeling so safe and so comfortable. So that is true, and I do encourage people to utilize those resources in the event that something does happen, because it went from a really unfortunate issue that she internalized, and she walked away feeling really good and comfortable and safe. So yes, please do that. And then one more thing. At some of the schools, there's windows that are kind of propped open, and there is some sort of material there. I don't know what it is. How secure are those?
Okay, let me share about that. I think that's when you first came on. Yep. So because we have currently Willard is just about done, with the new ventilation system that's going to be in place. So those windows that are propped, they're propped because there's probably over 25 mobile air conditioning units in all the rooms, because during the almost 2 years to renovate or replace the heating and cooling system at Willard, we had to have mobile air conditioning units. So the design was approved by the police. The windows are propped open. There's about 12 inches or less of metal or PVC plastic that ventilates for the air conditioning unit. So once the air conditioning system, heating, HVAC system is complete, those propped windows will be gone.
Okay.
Okay.
I thought
Now,
that's
that
what
does
it
not,
was. I wasn't 100%
that's only Willard.
sure, though.
Griswold and Hubbard are slated for new HVAC systems. They also have, so they're also going to have the propped windows or some type of system so you can run the mobile units. It'll probably be, 2 to 3 years to complete both of those where we'll have propped windows. But they're not propped wide open. They're propped underneath. There's still metal holding the window. I mean, if the window was there without it being propped, someone could break the window and get in. It's no different. It's not like it's, they can lift the window all the way up. It's secure still. So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Just gonna give it a moment. All right, so I think that's gonna conclude this evening. Would anyone like to share any concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I just want to thank, a week or so ago, Superintendent Benigni, Dr. Julie. They had a thought about this forum with all that has been happening, unfortunately, in our country, in our state, around the world, actually. So security is always utmost on, I think, all of our minds, wherever we happen to be, workplace, school, on the highway, doesn't matter today. So I think it was a great idea to have a forum and get this information out to you guys, have the experts here that deal with it every day, and hopefully we made everyone, and you can pass some of this information along to everyone else that, you feel a little bit better if you didn't know some of the procedures and security measures we have in place in our school system. And we've all worked very hard to make this happen, and we think we have a pretty secure system compared to most districts, and it's a great cooperative effort with everybody in town. So thank you all for coming. Thank all you up here for your expertise and sharing that with everyone. So thank you.
All right.
The only thing I'd like to say is, please, if you have any questions, do not hesitate to call or email. We definitely will answer any questions, whether it's the building principal, the security director, myself. We'll do our best to answer the question. And if you have certain suggestions and things, or certain things that you're concerned about, we'd much rather hear about them than not. So thank you.
Thank you. Have a great night.